It was a Friday night, and the rain fell incessantly over the city, turning the streets into rivers of dark water and slippery asphalt. Emily, a young woman of 25, had spent the night with her friends at a lively party. Now, with the clock striking 3 in the morning, she knew it was time to go home and escape the hustle and bustle of the night. He decided to call an Uber to make the journey back. Sitting on the porch of her friend's house, Emily entered her destination into the app and waited for her car. She was tired and longed for the comfort of her bed. As the rain fell heavily, the app notified that the driver was on his way and would arrive in a few minutes. Emily wrapped her coat around her and held tight to her bag, waiting for the black car that slowly appeared around the corner. The driver stopped the vehicle in front of her and rolled down the window, revealing a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a forced smile. "You're Emily, right?" he asked, his voice a little strange. She nodded, relieved to have found her driver. "Yes, it's me. I'm going to 47 Elm Street." The driver nodded and opened the car door, allowing Emily to enter. She noticed that the interior of the vehicle was dark, lit only by the instrument panel. It wasn't the most welcoming environment, but the last thing Emily wanted to do was stand in the rain. The car started to move, and Emily relaxed in her seat, watching the raindrops run down the window. She tried to start a conversation with the driver to break the awkward silence. "It's a terrible night, isn't it?" Emily commented, trying to establish a human connection. The driver, however, remained silent. His grim expression remained unchanged, and he did not respond to Emily's remark. The young woman began to feel uncomfortable, but decided to give the driver the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he was just having a bad night. As the car made its way through town, Emily noticed that the driver wasn't taking the most direct route to her home. He seemed to be choosing dark, deserted side streets, moving further and further away from the city center. Emily's discomfort grew. She took out her phone to check the app's map and make sure they were on the right path. However, when trying to update the app, Emily realized that her phone had no signal. She tried several times, but the no connection message continued to appear on the screen. Panic began to set in Emily as she realized something was terribly wrong. She looked at the driver, who continued driving with his expression somber and distant. Her heart started to beat faster, and she wished she had never gotten into that car. Noticing Emily's growing anxiety, the driver finally broke the silence and said, with a forced smile on his lips, "Don't worry, we're just taking a shortcut. You'll be home soon." The driver's words brought Emily no comfort. On the contrary, they only intensified their fear. She was now convinced that something was terribly wrong. Her heart hammered in her chest, and she wished she had taken extra precautions before getting into that car. As the car sped through the deserted streets, Emily knew she was in danger. She was trapped in her car, far from the safety of her home, and with no cell phone signal to call for help. What would happen next? She didn't know, but fear began to take hold of her, and she prayed that the situation wouldn't get worse. The silence in the car became even more oppressive as the driver continued to move away from the city and into increasingly remote areas. Emily felt her heart tighten with fear, and she tried desperately to remain calm. She needed to understand what was happening and, perhaps, find a way to escape this sinister situation. Deciding to break the silence, Emily turned to the driver and said with a hint of apprehension in her voice, "You know, it's not really a shortcut if we're going in the opposite direction. What's going on?" The driver kept his eyes fixed on the dark road, and the dim lighting of the city's lanterns was the only thing that revealed his grim expression. Finally, he began speaking in a monotone, as if reciting a story. "Many years ago, I was just an ordinary Uber driver, taking passengers from one place to another. But my life changed one night, when a mysterious man got into my car. He took me to a remote location and started telling me scary stories that should never be heard." The driver's blank gaze fixed on the rearview mirror, and Emily could see the anguish in his eyes. "He told me stories that seemed straight out of creepypastas and horror stories, with sinister creatures and terrifying endings. Since that day, these stories have tormented me, haunting me like nightmares." Emily was increasingly perplexed and concerned by what she was hearing. "That's strange, but I don't understand how that justifies the route we're taking. Please take me home now." The driver, however, continued his disturbing narrative. "I believe that these stories are real, that they hide dark secrets and evil entities. and the only way to escape them is to pass them on to someone else. You, Emily, are now part of my story, and I need to share these stories terrifying to you. Emily's despair grew as she realized she was trapped in a car with a clearly distraught driver. Her desire was to escape at any cost, but the car continued to move, and the driver did not respond to Emily's pleas to let her out. Emily looked around the car for a way to defend herself or get someone's attention. She saw her cell phone on the passenger seat, but it was useless without signal. His only hope was to find an opportunity to escape when the car stopped. As the dark road stretched ahead, Emily continued to talk to the driver. She hoped someone would notice her absence and call the police. "Please, you don't have to do this," Emily begged. "We can resolve this another way. I swear I won't tell anyone about the stories you told me. Just let me go home." The driver remained unfazed, his gaze fixed on the road. "It's too late, Emily. You're part of the stories now. You'll see." As the car approached an even more deserted country road, Emily realized that her opportunity to escape was rapidly diminishing. Her thoughts were filled with fear and uncertainty about what the driver planned to do to her. Emily knew she had to act. She observed her surroundings for an opportunity. When the car slowed as it approached a sharp curve, Emily saw her chance. With determination, she opened the car door and jumped out, rolling down the wet road. The cold rain and mud covered her body, but Emily quickly got up and ran into the thicket on the side of the road. She didn't look back, afraid to see the driver following her. Instead, Emily ran as fast as she could, desperate to escape the nightmare she was living. Emily ran desperately down the dark, muddy road, her eyes full of tears and her heart racing with fear. She knew she was far from home and had no idea where she was. The incessant rain continued to pour down on her, making her escape even more difficult. As she ran, Emily searched desperately for signs of civilization or help. She saw a sign on the side of the road that indicated the proximity of a gas station. It was her only hope of finding someone who could help her. Finally, after an exhausting run, Emily arrived at the gas station. She was soaked and shivering from the cold, but relieved to be in a bright place with people around her. She entered the gas station and immediately asked the attendant for help, a middle-aged man who looked at her with concern. "Please, you need to call the police. I was in an Uber and the driver got really weird. He dropped me off in the middle of nowhere," Emily begged. The attendant called the police immediately, and Emily explained to them everything that had happened, from the party to the moment she jumped out of the car. Police promised to investigate the incident and ensure his safety. As she waited for authorities to arrive, Emily felt a deep sense of relief that she had escaped the nightmare with the Uber driver. While giving a statement to the police, Emily realized that she did not know the driver's name or any personal information about him. She could only vaguely describe him as a middle-aged man with a gloomy expression. Still, he hoped authorities could track the vehicle and identify the driver based on information from the app. After a few hours of questioning, the police assured Emily that they were doing everything they could to locate the Uber driver and that she would be safe. They offered to take her back home, and she gratefully accepted their kindness. As the police car drove her back to the safety of her home, Emily reflected on the terrible nightmare she had lived through. She was grateful to have escaped with her life, but still felt haunted by the driver's dark history and sinister motivations. The next day, Emily woke up feeling relieved to be home and grateful to have escaped the nightmare she had experienced the night before. However, the experience would haunt her for a long time. She wondered if the Uber driver had been captured and what he planned to do with the scary stories he insisted on sharing. Emily decided not to let fear control her life. She refused to become a victim and was determined to overcome the trauma she had experienced. She was also determined to spread the word about safety when using ride-sharing services, raising awareness of potential dangers, and encouraging everyone to take extra precautions when traveling alone. Although Emily had escaped the sinister driver, she knew that the dark, rainy night would continue to haunt her dreams. She hoped that the police would be able to track down the driver and that he would face the consequences of his disturbing actions. However, Emily knew that the nightmare she had experienced would not be forgotten easily, and that the Uber driver's story would become part of her own frightening memories. The days following Emily's terrifying night in her Uber driver's car were filled with anxiety and fear. She had reported the incident to the police and cooperated with the investigation as much as she could, but authorities faced difficulties in tracking down the driver, whose information was limited. The weeks passed, and Emily lived in constant fear that she would meet the driver again, or that he might try to get revenge for her escaping. She avoided going out alone at night and took extra safety measures in her everyday life. Finally, news arrived that the Uber driver had been located and arrested by authorities. He would face charges of kidnapping, threats, and criminal conduct. Emily felt immense relief, but also a sense of continued vulnerability as the lurid stories the driver had shared with her continued to haunt her. Emily sought support and therapy to deal with the trauma she'd experienced. She shared her experiences with a therapist who specialized in crime victims, who helped her understand her feelings and face the frequent nightmares that plagued her. However, even with professional support, Emily knew recovery would be a long and challenging process. She was determined to take back control of her life and not let the incident define her. Over time, Emily began to get involved in safety awareness campaigns when using ride-sharing services. She shared her story with others to warn them of the dangers they could face and encouraged people to take extra precautions when traveling alone. Her story began to attract local media attention, and Emily became an active advocate for ride-hailing rider safety. She has appeared on television and radio programs to share her experience and promote safety measures. As time passed, Emily found herself stronger and more resilient. She knew the Uber driver was behind bars, and she was determined to move on with her life. There were still times when memories of that dark night haunted her, but she was determined not to let fear control her. As the months passed, Emily continued to work on overcoming her trauma. She also used her experience to inspire others to share their stories of overcoming. Her journey of healing and empowerment turned her into a beacon of hope for those facing similar challenges. Emily's story, although full of terror and suffering, became a story of resilience and determination. She showed herself and the world that it is possible to overcome the darkest moments and find strength in adversity. Emily chose not to be defined by one nightmarish night, but rather by her ability to overcome it and inspire others to do the same. The Uber driver remained in prison, paying for his criminal acts, while Emily found the strength to move on. The nightmare she had lived through would not be forgotten, but the way she faced it and used her experience to help others stay safe made her story one of hope and overcoming.